Good morning, Monco, and welcome back to week 4 of our online adult Sunday school. If you are not a member of the Monco Bible Fellowship and you happen to be watching this separate from the Sunday morning stream, my name is Charles Foster. I'm the adult Sunday school teacher. Today is April 19th, 2020, and we have been doing a Bible survey, looking at the big picture of the individual books of the Bible, starting with Genesis, and we're all the way through to those books of poetry and wisdom. We are in Ecclesiastes today doing part 2 because we started last week and got up to chapter 2 in part 1. So as you look at this outline, as we said, we kind of split this outline right in half, but we only got to chapter 2 because we laid a good foundation of some of the key terms and what the book of Ecclesiastes is all about. So, Lord willing, we're going to go right through the entire book today through chapter 12. Under the sun is one of the terms we got into last week. And of course, everyone knows that term. There's nothing new under the sun. But under the sun is a term that Solomon uses in this book 29 times. And it really is the heart of what the book is about because it's looking at life, looking at the world, looking at all of this stuff we call living apart from God, apart from God's perspective on things. It's looking at it from a very secular view, man's perspective, under the sun. And when you continue to do that and you remove God from it, it can become very cynical. It can become very defeatist, and you get this sense of vanity that Solomon introduces in the very second verse of the book. Vanity, that Hebrew word havel, and as we said last week, it doesn't mean vanity in a prideful way, like he's so vain or anything like that. It just has a sense of emptiness, meaninglessness, hopelessness. As we talked about also last week with the existentialist philosophers, that sense of absurdity when you see life and what appears to be the unfairness and all those type of things that we kind of say about life from our earthly perspective. So it's the vanity of everything under the sun. And essentially, you can kind of sum up the book of Ecclesiastes here by saying it's apart from God, all is vanity. All is a vapor. That thing that you see, you're trying to grasp it, and then it's just gone, and it's gone forever. And it's that sense of just hopelessness that Solomon just permeates this whole book until we get to the very end. So here we go. Chapter 3 is what we're picking up today. In chapter 3, we're going to start out with the birds. And some of you might know the birds by the picture if you were certainly of an age where you were around when they were singing. But if you're not, you know that song because even my son who helped set this up, who's a teenager, knew the song. You know the song. To everything, turn, 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 guitars playing, right? And there is a season, turn, turn. And then here comes the key part, and a time to every purpose under heaven. That's the beginning of verse 1 from chapter 3. And the rest of what they sing about, a time to be born, a time to die, you know the rest of the song. And then skipping down, a time to kill, a time to heal, time to break down, a time to build up, a time to weep, a time to laugh. All those life events Solomon is talking about. He goes into 28 different life events, and they're kind of juxtaposed against each other in an opposite way of born and die. And when you look at it, a lot of people look at it and see Solomon kind of more of the same thing. He started out early talking about the mechanisms of the earth and how it just the sun comes up, it goes down. It's the same thing over and over again. And they see this as the same way. And then others see it as more poetic and almost lofty because that's the way the birds kind of sing it. And it just depends on your perspective. But I think, to be honest, Solomon is doing it in a lighter way because, as you'll see when we get into our next clip, Solomon is the beginning to interject God into this in chapter 3, a little bit, 5, and a couple of times after that until he really brings it around full circle in chapter 12, as we're going to see when we look at our video clip. But the last thing is this. Here's the rest of this little passage here, right? Look at verse number 5. a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. And that's certainly relevant to us today, right? Because the Solomon didn't know this, how prophetic this was, but there was a time, 6 months ago, when it was a time for us to embrace. But it certainly isn't now. We can't even get 6 feet from each other. So it's interesting, just a lot when you read through it. So let's take a look at our clip. We're going to look at Pastor Landon again, and he's going to finish the rest of this book and start out with that concept of vanity expanded. Let's take a look.
Then Solomon moves into the next section. Vanity expanded is what I've called it. This is chapters 7 to 9, and it contains language and format much more similar to the book of Proverbs. It's shorter, it's pithier, but it's the same content, but it's filtered through the style of the Proverbs. He talks about the difference between wisdom and folly. He talks about advice in dealing with kings, the rewards of fearing God, God's unknowability, and more on the inevitability of death. It's just sad, man. He gives an illustration of the chance of death. He's like, it could happen to anyone at any time. Then he talks about the chance of wealth. He says it doesn't always go to the smartest people. Then he tells a story. There was a city with only a few men living in it, and a king came and surrounded the city to capture it. So this king's got like a big army and all this stuff to siege the city. It's looking like everybody in it's gonna die. Then this poor wise man turns up with a plan and delivered the city. Okay, so this is a pretty good story, right? No, not for Ecclesiastes, because the people of the town forgot about the guy that saved their lives. So is Ecclesiastes just basically negative about everything? Kind of, but it's more complicated than that, because in the midst of all the darkness, the light begins to shine. Chapter 11:1 says, "Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it in many days." It's a proverb about not hoarding and about receiving back for generosity. All right, let's go. Something positive. And more positive stuff follows. Verse 7 says, "Light is sweet and pleasant for the eyes to see the sun." And then, so if a person lives many years, let him rejoice in all of them. And then he finishes with this, "But let him remember that the days of darkness will be many, and all that comes is vanity." And right there is the juxtaposition of Ecclesiastes. The things that you think will make you happy make you empty. But in that, there's hope of trust and remembrance of God. And then the final chapter, it opens with my favorite verse in the book, "Remember now your Creator in the days of your youth." And it ends with, "Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil." And just as mysteriously as it begins on a down note, the book of Ecclesiastes ends with a harmonious chord of vision. This book has been influential in ways we don't even see. There's a bunch of English idioms that originate here. Eat, drink, and be merry from chapter 8, a fly in the ointment from chapter 10, for everything there's a season from chapter 3, from dust to dust, which has been said at hundreds of thousands of funerals. That's originally from here, from chapter 3. God created, man fell, Jesus promised, Jesus fulfilled, Jesus followed, Jesus returning, and the Bible is God's word.
All right, excellent job as usual. I brought this slide back up from last week because filling the void under the sun. We talked about all those isms, and life under the sun causes secular man who's pushed God out the picture, causes him to come up with all these isms, all these worldviews to explain that vanity. So, where there's naturalism, hedonism, all the efforts we do, humanism was the one we focused on last week, and we used that clip from Titanic. This week, we're going to focus on another of the isms that's really prevalent in the book of Ecclesiastes, and that's existentialism. If you remember, I talked about those existentialist philosophers last week when I talked about Kierkegaard and Nietzsche and John Paul Sartre and the others. They came up with this mindset or this word of absurdity as it describes life. And they're right because it seems ridiculous at times. The problem is that how they reacted to that absurdity was not one of it's messed up under the sun, God help us. But they developed another ism, existentialism. Take a look. Existentialism is a philosophy, now listen, that emphasizes individual existence. It emphasizes the individual. Sound familiar? Think about today's culture. And here's the second thing, freedom of choice. Sounds very familiar. That's who we are now. It's a view that defines humans by making their own meaning, finding out who they are, not their own meaning in life from a God from above who they would say you just made up anyway, but you have to determine it yourself. So life is absurd, life is meaningless, but we have to step out of that and show our existence. We have to make choices and define our own meaning. And that kind of sounds like, yeah, but you know what? You look at a lot of those guys and they messed their life up so much, even though they supposedly believed this, that at the end, they were just as hopeless. Through all the studying, through all the philosophizing, through all the teaching, they were left just as hopeless as Solomon is through the most of this book. This is what we're going to do. We're going to take a look at a movie, The Truman Show. A lot of you probably are familiar with this movie. It's fairly old now, but it really resonates with existentialism. So let's take a look at just the trailer now.
Coming to you now from the largest studio ever constructed, it's The Truman Show!
Yeah! Good morning!
Good morning.
Oh, and in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
What if?
No scripts, no cue cards.
Morning, Spencer. How's it going?
What if you were watched every moment of your life?
How many cameras you got there in that town?
5,000.
I believe Truman is the first child to have been legally adopted by a corporation.
That's correct.
Brilliant.
What if everyone you knew was pretending?
Hi, honey. Look what I got at the checkout. Dishwasher safe.
That's amazing.
What if your world was make-believe?
Cue the sun. While the world he inhabits is counterfeit,
I'm not allowed to talk to you.
That's how I look. Not your type.
there's nothing fake about Truman himself.
What if you didn't know it? Until now.
A lot of strange things have been happening.
Stand by ring cam.
Is he looking at us?
Does he think he knows?
I think I'm mixed up in something. Something big.
We accept the reality with which we're presented.
You may find yourself in another part of the world.
Feels like the whole world revolves around me. Everybody seems to be in on it.
I'm going away for a while.
You may tell yourself, this is not my beautiful wife. You may ask yourself, how did I get here?
I'm not in on it, Truman, because the last thing that I would ever do is lie to you.
Fade up music. That's our hero shot.
He's gone.
Okay? Yes!
Want to do it again? No!
Find him. Truman, where are you going?
You can do it.
How do we stop him?
Give me some lightning.
Is that the best you can do?
Cut transmission!
I like your pen. I was wondering that myself.
Jim Carrey. The Truman Show. Watch what happens.
Okay, so the trailer showed a pretty good understanding of what the movie is about. And essentially, remember, Truman is a real life person who doesn't know that his entire life has been essentially the main character in a reality show. And by the way, this is very prophetic in this sense that this movie came out before all the deluge of variety shows, I mean, variety shows, reality shows that we have now. So it really was, it's almost another message in it too. But the one we're looking at, look at the bottom right there. It says The Truman Show, right? On the air, unaware. So everybody in this world that they're created are actors except for him. And then you have the outside audience that's watching it. And it's the number one show in the world. He has this kind of pristine kind of life where he's doing the middle class, thing and everything. And then suddenly, as you see in the bottom left picture, this light falls out of what he thinks is the sky. And he realizes, wait a minute, what's going on here? And he starts to wonder, as you saw in the video, what's going on. And I think I'm being watched and something's not right. You see him driving through that fire in the car. He's trying to break through this fake world that's been created. He just senses something is wrong. And you even saw a clip where he's on a boat and he's screaming, "Is that all you got?" And that's when he's trying to escape the fake world there. And he's trying to escape it via the water to get to his paradise, which he sees in the movie as Fiji. Now remember, he's being watched all the time. So when he tries to escape, they're going to stop him. And what you see in the next clip we're going to watch is he's finally broken through all the storm and everything that they purposely, the director, Ed Harris, purposely sent down to stop him. And what you're going to see in the next clip is what happens when he finally breaks through. He's on smooth ground, smooth water. He's sailing smoothly, and then he hits his real reality. Now, remember, he's broken through. They're watching him sail. He hits the wall. The director, Ed Harris, who's the creator of the show, realizes I got to do one last ditch effort to stop him. So he realizes I got to come out of this secret hidden role and I have to talk to him. So that's when he talks to him. So let's take a look.
Truman. You can speak. I can hear you.
Who are you?
I am the creator of a television show that gives hope and joy and inspiration to millions.
Then who am I?
You're the star.
Was nothing real?
You were real. That's what made you so good to watch. Listen to me, Truman. There's no more truth out there than there is in the world I created for you. Same lies, the same deceit. But in my world, you have nothing to fear. I know you better than you know yourself.
You never had a camera in my head.
You're afraid. That's why you can't leave. It's okay, Truman. I understand. I have been watching you your whole life. I was watching when you were born. I was watching when you took your first step. I watched you on your first day of school. The episode when you lost your first tooth. You can't leave, Truman.
Please, God.
You belong here.
You can do it.
With me. Talk to me. Say something.
In case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Yeah.
Cease transmission.
Ceasing transmission.
You want another slice?
No, I'm okay.
What else is on?
Yeah, let's do what else.
Where's the TV guy?
All right. A lot was going on there. I've heard a lot of people, and I've read a lot of people in the past when this movie was out and everything, really analyze this from a philosophical point of view, kind of what we're doing to a certain degree. From a theological point of view, we're certainly doing that. From a sociological point of view, from a psychological point of view. But I've also heard Christians look at it And when you look at blogs and everything, and they'll say, well, I like the movie because this is Truman breaking away from the bonds of the world and making a decision to break free of that and accept God and walk in the newness of what he's been called to. That's not what it's about at all. Come on, Christians. Come on, believers. I know this might not be all of them, but wake up and smell the toast burning. Look at the guy's name. The creator, his name is Christoph. That's not an accident. Look at the first three letters. What do they spell? All right, let's do this. Here we go. Earlier in the movie, he says, this is Ed Harris, right? We accept the reality of the world with which we're presented. It's as simple as that. When we're talking about existentialism, and not just them, but a lot of those philosophies that are without God, that's exactly what they say about the average person. You just accept your plight and you don't step up to do something. Like, remember, you're supposed to exhibit that individual freedom, make a choice, and define your own meaning. But they really say it about believers because they say that we've just accepted all the fairy tales about this God and we do nothing to think about the reality. When it comes to the climax here, you see the director has to start speaking, and he speaks from Truman's perspective. It's like God is speaking to him, right? Because it comes out of what he knows as the sky. And he says, "Who are you?" Right? Truman says that to him. Same kind of questions we might be saying to God if we want to know who he is. He says, listen to what he says. And yeah, I took the last two letters off for a reason. I am the creator. And then he pauses. He says, I am the creator of a television show that gives hope and joy and inspiration to millions. Now, what's so amazing about that is that's just the way a lot of unbelievers would say we see our God, one who gives hope and joy and inspiration. But that's not who he really is. You know who he really is? He's the guy that was throwing lightning bolts down on your boat when you were trying to break the bonds of them. You see where we're going? So now Truman is having this conversation. And Truman asks, of course, who am I? And he tells him, you're the star. And he says it in a very loving way. You're the star. Was any of this real? Was nothing real? You were real, Truman. That's what made you so good to watch. And he's saying it so lovingly. If you really watch the clip, there's one scene when he's kind of almost stroking the iPad where he can see Truman that he's talking to, like he's caressing and giving him comfort. And he's portraying himself as this loving creator of the show because he doesn't want Truman to see the truth of his life. Here, where we're going. And by the way, that's what made you so good to watch, is because he's Truman. He's the true man. He's the only one in that whole little self contained world that was real. Everybody else was an actor. And now this true man needs to step out and find his destiny. That's existentialism in his heart. Listen to me, Truman. This is the creator talking. There's no more truth out there than there is in the world I created for you. Same lies, same deceits. He goes on to say, but in my world, you have nothing to fear. I know you better than you know yourself. Look, listen to this dialogue. This creator is saying to this Truman, this true man, what's out there in the world is no different than what's here, is therefore I protect you here. You need to stay here with me. I know you better than you know yourself, almost like I know every hair in your head. You know how much I know you? I know you when you were born. I know you when you took your first step. I know you in your first day of school, when you lost your first tooth. You can't leave, Truman. You belong here with me. Stay here in this safe little garden because if you go out there, there's a world that you don't want to face. That's what existentialism, that's what the world says to us. Did God really say that, Eve? He didn't say that. God knows the day that you eat that fruit, you're going to be just like him. God is holding back. He doesn't want you to see who you really can be. That creator is holding you back. Stay here. And of course, you know what Truman's response is. And by the way, isn't it interesting that Truman's first understanding that something is wrong in this world is when a light fell from the sky? That light is Sirius, which is the brightest light in the sky, which is the morning star. I saw Satan fall from the sky. Let's roll. All right, so Truman makes his decision. Truman, after he's implored by the director to say something, he says, "In case I don't see you," and this is the line he said throughout the movie to his neighbors, to his friends, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Essentially, goodbye, I'm out of here. I'm stepping out into the unknown because I can't stay in this fake world that has been created to hold me back. I'm going to find my destiny. I'm going to find out the reality of who I am. And of course, in the movie, everybody's clapping and everything. But that's just what the world would say we as believers are too afraid to do. You're too weak to do. You need this God as a crutch to lean on. Here's the sad part about it. They say all those kind of things like that, right? But the reality is that they're the very ones saying when you go into that world that everything is vanity. For as much as I talked about those existentialists, um, those philosophers, they were just as lost as the end, as I said. And when they took God out the picture, and when they had that sense of living apart from God, they realized that all is vanity. And they made up all these isms to try to justify it. But yet they're telling us to do the same thing when we appear often to be content with who we are. Look at this quote. If you look at the world, you'll be distressed. If you look within, you'll be depressed. If you look at God, you'll be at rest. And that's Corey Ten Boom, who was a believer that was in the concentration camps, which he said is so true. Think about it. If you look at the world, you'll be distressed. You know why? Because you're going to see vanity. You're going to see everything under the sun. You're going to see all these philosophers who studied and did all this, and they don't have any answers. If you look within, you're going to be depressed. You know why? Because your heart is desperately wicked. And all of that stuff you see on TV show, oh, just go follow your heart, just go with your heart, that's going to leave you feeling empty. However, if you look at God, you'll be at rest. You know why? Because of what we said last week. You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they what? Until they rest in you. Augustine and Corey Ten Boom realized the key. That's why Solomon finally brings it around full tilt. He starts in a little bit of chapter 11, but all of chapter 12, as Pastor Landon told us. Look what he says to start out chapter 12. Remember your creator in the days of your youth. You know why? Because Solomon realized, I went astray, and I don't want you to do that. If you serve him in the days of your youth, you're not going to have all the emptiness I had trying to find happiness through women, through wine, through work, through all the other things he did, through just simple pleasure, through wisdom, and some other W in there through the alliteration, right? Fear God and keep his commandments. That goes back to what Solomon had written probably in an earlier time in his life in the Proverbs, which is the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. He understood that then. He's going astray, and now he's bringing it back to it. Solomon probably wrote this when he was much older. See, the world's perspective that there's nothing new under the sun is true because everything is the same old, same old. You're left with that void, with that emptiness. You're not at rest because you're searching in the wrong places for contentment. But when you begin to search in the right place, then you realize that he makes all things new. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation, a new creation. Old things have passed away, and behold, all things have become new. That's right. Under the sun, nothing is new. But under the SON, which is what he talks about in Ecclesiastes 11 and 12, all things have become new. You walk in newness of life when it's life under the SON. And get this, at the very end, he's going to say to all this, watch this, guys. I'm going to make all things new. That's what the true newness is about, that you can only experience under the SON, not the SUN. If you think it's just a New Testament thing, go back to the book of Isaiah. Remember not the former things, nor consider the things of old. Behold, I am doing what? A new thing. And now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? So it's not just a New Testament thing. You know why? Because he's the same God yesterday, today, and forever. That's why he's going to make all things new. Look at the last one as we wrap things up here. It says, and be not conformed to this world, because we've come back to this a lot, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. The only way that can happen is through this word. The only way that can happen is in him. We've been studying these books of poetry as we're going through all the books of the Old Testament and eventually the New Testament also. Let's flip it around a little bit. The wisdom books, right? The poetry books. If we understand that all of God's words ministers to us, ministers to our spirit, ministers to our soul, let's think about what we've been doing since we've been online. Take off Job for a second. We already covered Job. Job is an amazing book. It's all about suffering. That definitely relates to most of us and probably can relate to a lot of us now as we're in this quarantine state. If we remove Song of Solomon, which we're going to go into next week, and we look at the three books that we've really been focused on for such a time as this, that we've been online, they truly minister to the soul. Now, God's word from Genesis to Revelation does, but look how succinctly this does. Number one, your soul is your mind, your will, and your emotions. We just finished Ecclesiastes. That's the book of the mind, the book of philosophies. That book is one of, are you going to adopt a worldview or a way of thinking that is under the sun, SUN, or under the SON, sun, which is above all? The book of Proverbs is a book about the will. Are you going to trust in the Lord with all your heart, or are you going to make a decision to lean on your own understanding? And you see where we're going. The book of Proverbs is one that ministers to your emotions, because that's the one where we cry out to God. That's the one when you read that when you're struggling. That's the one where he comes to us as our strong tower, as our refuge, as our cleft in the rock. You see what these books are doing? That's why we said you got to read your proverb a day. You got to read those Psalms. You got to understand what Ecclesiastes is really about. You got to read it. You got to study it. You got to memorize it. You got to meditate on it. As we wrap things up, this is so significant in this time we're in now, because Solomon just demonstrated that you can go after all those things and still wind up empty. You know why? Because just like I shared when I spoke in church the last time when we were together, you can't go after happiness for the sake of happy. You can't go after pleasure for the sake of pleasure. You can't go after all those things. You go after him. You pursue God. You pursue Jesus. And then all those things are added on to you. He is your happiness. He is the personification of wisdom. Solomon was searching for truth and all that wisdom. He didn't understand there was one who was the embodiment of truth. Truth is a person. This is so significant for all we're going through now, because Solomon just failed to understand that with all his wisdom, he was lost without God. But we're better than that, because a greater one than Solomon is here and we know him. Don't believe the lie that being a Christian means going through something and going through life just scot-free of all kind of temptations and all kind of trials and all kind of tribulations, because that's just some of that garbage you hear on Christian television sometimes. What this walk is about is going through it, not with the absence of trials, but who goes through those trials with you. And that's the one who wants us to embrace him, who wants us to know him, to who wants us to share him. He is Yeshua HaMashiach. He is the risen Savior. He is our Messiah. If you got any comments, leave them on the bottom of this page. If you got any questions, leave them on the bottom of this page, and we'll incorporate them into the next time we meet. Because the next time we meet, we're doing the Song of Solomon, speaking about God's love. I'm kind of tired. So, you know what? I'm going to leave you here now. I thank you very much. I hope this ministered to you. It certainly ministered to me as I was preparing for it. We now turn you over to a short time of music, and then the next voice that you hear after that is going to be Brother Les as he prepares us for breaking of bread in our communion. God bless and stay safe.